Father in heaven, we thank you for this day you blessed us with, just to be able to come here and to study from your word, Lord. You've blessed us with such abundance, and we often lose sight of the fact that all that we have comes from you. And we're very thankful. We know that in this particular part of the country, well, in this country and in this particular part of it, we're blessed with freedoms and physical blessings beyond that which most people in the world have ever experienced. And we're very thankful. And we recognize that oftentimes that we become dependent on the physical things of this life. And we pray, Lord, that although we are blessed abundantly, we pray that we would continue to look to you first and not to lean on our own understanding or to look to the world for answers or to trust in wealth and riches, but to know that all that we need in life comes from you and from your word, and you've given us everything that we need to know in order to live a life that is acceptable in your sight. And we're so very thankful for that. We're thankful that we have a path forward, and we know that that path is nothing without Jesus, and we're thankful for him as well, and the fact that we recognize that he is God, and yet he left heaven and became a man, and he lived a sinless, perfect life, and taught and made connections and made friends, and yet he offered himself as a willing sacrifice so that we can be redeemed. We're thankful for his sacrifice and the purpose it gives us in our lives and the hope that we have to spending eternity in your presence when our life is over. We're so very thankful for that. And Lord, we pray that you be with all of the students and all the classes and the teachers this morning, that the things that we are saying and doing are acceptable in your sight, and the things that we learn today will be according to your will and be things that we can apply into our lives and become better servants of yours. And above all, again, we're thankful for your Son and his sacrifice. And it's through his name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. So we're going to finish chapter 10. We just had a few verses left in chapter 10, but just to quickly go over where we were, this is the chapter that we talked about the 5 examples from the Old Testament about the children of Israel and what we should learn from them. So the examples were lust. You know, well, let's not get into specifics. We've got to move along. Lust, idolatry, fornication, temptation, tempting God, and complaining. So these were, in verse 6 of chapter 10, it says, now these things, which he's talking about right in this spot here, became our examples to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Verse 7, idolaters. Verse 8, sexual immorality. Verse 9, tempting Christ. Verse 10, murmur or complain. So all these things were found in the children of Israel when they were passing or going through the Red Sea and then going into the wilderness. And so we look back at Numbers, the book of Numbers mostly, where in these things, all lusting, all died. Idolatry, 3,000 died. Fornication, 23,000 died. Tempting God, many died. Complaining, 14,700 died. So we have this list, and it's for our learning, so that we shouldn't do those things. And it gives us an idea of what the Old Testament is for. Sometimes we think we're not under that law, so we don't need the Old Testament. Well, here it's telling us this is what we need the Old Testament for. Verse 11 again, he says, now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition. That is, to put in our mind, to warn us, on whom the ends of the ages have come. And then we saw verse 13, no temptation has overtaken you except such as common to man, but God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear it. What a verse of comfort for everyone, that there is always a way of escape, and God's provided that. Then we looked at verses about the Lord's Supper, idolatry, meat sacrificed to idols. We went back to some part of that. Remember, chapter 8 was about that. And then, let's see, we got down to verse 28. So that's where we ended up last week. But if anyone says to you, this was offered to idols, do not eat it. So remember, we came to that conclusion, well, there is nothing to meat sacrificed to idols. Idols don't exist. The meat isn't tainted. But remember, if you're being offered, and okay, I'll eat that, and then the person said, this was offered to Zeus or Hermes or whatever, don't eat it for the sake of the one who told you, and for conscience sake, for the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness. Everything comes from God. Verse 29, conscience, I say, not your own, but that of the other. For why is my heart judged by another man's conscience? Well, that's a rhetorical question, and he's been answering it in chapter 8 and chapter 9. He's been answering that for love's sake, that they may be saved. If you look down at verse 33, just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. That's the purpose. Verse 30, but if I partake with thanks, why am I evil spoken of for the food which I give thanks? Well, there is an answer to that. It's not just about my rights, or verse 31, therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God, not just based on my rights. In Romans chapter 15 and verse 2, or 1 and 2, but then we who are strong ought to bear with the scruples of the weak, and not to please ourselves. Let each of us please his neighbor for his good, leading to edification. So think about what my decision, what I might consider as my right to do, what it has, what is the effect on others? And so, verse 32, give no offense either to the Jews or the Greeks or the church of God. So in the church, outside of the church, think about an occasion of stumbling that you can cause because you are demanding your rights. And then, you look at, let me go back to chapter 8. We in 1 Corinthians 8, the chapter about meat sacrificed to idols, and how does he end that? Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. So I give up that right if I make my brother stumble. And then chapter 9, that was another chapter. This was about paying him, or paying preachers, the preachers of the gospel. And what is his conclusion there in verse 22? I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. That's my purpose. That's why he decided not to accept money from the Corinthians. He has the right. He proved it through here from several different angles in chapter 9 that he has that right. But he said, I won't do it for the sake of the gospel. And that's the same thing in chapter 10. And he's saying that they may be saved. So we move now to chapter 11. And chapter 11 through 14 is talking about things happening in the collective assembly. So it's when the church is gathered. And he starts out with in chapter 2 through 16, he's going to talk about the head covering. But in verse 1, he starts out saying, imitate me just as I also imitate Christ. So look at what Paul does, and when he imitates Christ, that's what Paul is doing. We imitate him, or you Corinthians imitate him. And so, and you think about reading about Jesus and all the events that you read about in the Gospels, And he was just a man that his life was loving other people. There were so many opportunities. You think about the woman at the well. You know, she had sin in her life, but what did he do? He's out to seek and save the lost, and he wants to bring her, and that attitude. And Paul, he imitates that. He just went through 3 chapters where he's talking about giving up his own rights for the sake of the gospel. And so us too, when we look at opportunities that we have, you know, sometimes I think of Calvinism, the doctrine of Calvinism, which is so terrible, what it does and how it undermines the gospel. But when you're talking to someone about it, there's a way, and you think about how Paul did it and how Jesus, you know, loves the people he talks to. There's a way to do it with love, and so that's the encouragement to us there too. Verse 2, now I praise you, brethren, that you remember me in all things and keep the traditions as I delivered them to you. So remember, this is in response to a letter that they sent him. This we saw in chapter 7 and verse 1, that they had sent him a letter. And so he's still answering these questions. And it seems like they've said something like, Paul, we're doing what you told us to do. And now he's answering that. Now I praise you, brethren, that you remember me in all things and keep the traditions. The first thing I thought of in traditions is Matthew 15:9, where Jesus talks about traditions that, let me read that. He's prophesying, or he's quoting from the prophets. Hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy about you. These people draw near me with their mouth, honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments, or in another translation, the traditions of men. Well, there are traditions that we do not want to follow, but here he's talking about traditions as I, the Apostle Paul, which would mean it's from Jesus, from God. That's that authority that came down. So it's and what tradition means is handed down. That's what the word means. But we want the handed down traditions that come from God, not from men. But I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. So here he puts that authority of headship of God, Christ, man, woman. No doubt. So that's the authority. It's kind of like in the military. Now, I hope I have this right. General, lieutenant, sergeant, corporal, and private. Is that right, Lou? Close enough. Okay. Okay. So it's just a headship, subordination. So now he turns verse 4. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonors his head. Well, who's his head? Christ. That's what we just saw. Christ is the head over man. But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered, without a covering, dishonors her head. Who's her head? Well, man, we just read that. For that is one and the same as if her head were shaved. Now, the word covering there is the Greek word katakalupto, and that means, kata means to hang down, and kalupto is a covering. So a hang down covering. So if I look at that, every man praying or prophesying, have his head with a hang down covering. Now let's just skip over to verse 15. I think it's 15. Yes, in verse 15, in this same context, we're going to see if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering. So there we find out that hair is given for a covering. So and we're going to make another comment on another covering word in this chapter that does not mean hang down covering, but we'll get to that in just a few minutes here. But here you have a man praying and prophesying. It would seem that we're talking about spiritual gifts, that they are praying and prophesying. At least the prophesying part would be a spiritual gift, because that is speaking prophecy. That is from God's mouth. You are delivering God's words. And then here are, in verse 5, women who are praying and prophesying. In Acts chapter 2, we've got that when Peter is preaching the first gospel sermon, and the people are speaking in tongues. They're speaking languages they didn't know. They're speaking, and then you have a list of what those languages were in that context. Parthians, Medes, all these different languages from different places. And he says there, now he says, he's answering the question, wow, what's going on? People want to know what's going on. And Peter tells them, but this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. So now he's going to quote Joel. The prophet Joel was looking forward to this happening, these people speaking in different languages that they never knew these languages, and they're speaking in them. Verse 17, this is the quote from Joel, "And it shall come to pass in the last days, says God, that I will pour out of my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy." So men and women would prophesy. So we have this situation where we've got another verse to consider, and that is 1 Timothy 2:8. Where Paul teaches on a woman's teaching to men and that authority. I should just, let's see, yeah. Where he says, "I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man." And in 1 Timothy 2, he's talking about the assembly. So when we assemble, it is a man's job to do the teaching. So we have the situation where I don't know exactly how this was happening. Was there groups of women meeting together, or was there since it was a spiritual gift, it was to everybody? I'm not going to answer that question. But in those two verses, then verse 5, "But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered," and that's a katakalupto, not hang down covering, not having a covering that hangs down. Again, that's short hair, and he's going to talk about that. Right after that, he says, her head uncovered dishonors her head, that is man. For that is one and the same as if her head were shaved. Verse 6, "For if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it is shameful for a woman to be shorn or shaved, let her be covered." Okay, so here we're talking about that covering being the hair. We've got 4 lengths of hair in these few verses. You've got long hair, which is, for on a man, on verse 3, or in verse 4, having his head covered, that's hang down covering. Verse 5, you've got short hair, not hanging down covering. And then you've got shorn and shaved, which would be a burr cut or a shaved like bald. And he's making a point. If the woman isn't covered, let her also be shorn. But if it is shameful for a woman to be shorn, which the intention is, yes, it is, let her be covered. In reading about Corinth, there's some historical evidence that the women in Corinth had a way of cutting many of them would cut their hair very short or shorn, and it had to do with their temple worship. And whether that's an issue here, whether you have this happening in new Christians, if you become a new Christian and you've got a shorn haircut, and you're a woman, then you're learning about this, but you've got a period of time before that grows out. That could be what's going on there too. Verse 7, for a man indeed ought not to cover his head, that's that hang down covering, for a man indeed ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. So from creation, there's been a recognized difference, a distinction between a man and a woman by the length of their hair. Verse 8, for man is not from woman, but woman from the man. So now we're looking at creation, and there's the rib that woman was taken from. Nor was man created for the woman, but woman for the man. That's the idea of the woman being a help that would meet his needs. Verse 10, for this reason, this cause or this reason, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. Okay, we've got another question that this brings up. We're talking about the length of the hair. The woman ought to have a symbol of authority, so that's what the length of hair, it's a symbol of authority. God, Jesus, man, woman. There is a symbol of authority on the woman that is a hang-down, long hair covering. And then it said, because of the angels. Well, that brings up other questions. What do the angels have to do with this? And an angel, they are ministering spirits. The word means messenger, and that would be messengers of God. We are told that we may entertain angels unawares on the earth. Lot did, Abraham did, Jesus did, Mary did. Now, they may have known. I'm not saying they all entertained them unaware, but they entertained them. So we know that they are messengers of God. And the only thing I can think of, this is how I put it, I look at that general, lieutenant, sergeant, corporal, private. And I'm looking at what is a symbol of authority in that realm? Well, it's stripes or a salute. Let me ask the people who have been in the military, is it correct that in each of these, general, lieutenant, sergeant, corporal, and private, does each one, does the private salute the corporal? Or and then the corporal salutes the sergeant? Does each one salute anyone above him, or are you just saluting the general? The what? Okay. So let's just look at it that way. So that would be something that would be a symbol of authority, the salute, right? For the private to come, and when he sees an officer, he salutes the officer. So that would be, and so you have somebody that doesn't, a private doesn't have that symbol of authority. They don't salute their officer. What's going to happen? Well, the military police or the MP is going to do something about it, or something's going to happen, right? So I think, I'm looking at what's the angel? He's an angel. He's a messenger of God. and he's seeing this authority ignored. So that's, maybe you have another thought on that, but that's how I would see that angels are God's messenger. They are there to do his bidding, and so they are, and it says because of the angels, they're going to be the ones, they at least are going to see this. And so verse 11, let's move on. Nevertheless, neither is man independent of woman, nor woman independent of man in the Lord. For as the woman was from the man, even so the man also is through the woman. But all things are from God. So, of course, man is born from a womb of a woman. So man comes from woman, and we just had that other talking about at creation, woman came from man. But all things are from God. Verse 13, judge among yourselves, is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Well, this would be a statement. I mean, this is a rhetorical, that yes, it would be, it's not proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered. That's the point he's making. Verse 14, does not even nature itself. Now, when you look up that word nature, it has a kind of a range of things it means, but it means it's either an inherent part or it's the custom. But it's nature itself. It's understood. Does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a dishonor to him? Okay, so there's something else about long hair on a man. But if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering. And in this verse, verse 15, her hair is given to her for a covering. So my wife walks in. I said, honey, where's your covering? And she says, my hair was given to me for a covering. Oh, okay. That's the answer. The hair was given to her. Now, should there be some length to it? Yeah, there's something there. In fact, I was looking at what is absolute here. The absolute that we know of is God, Jesus, man, and woman. That authority is absolute. There's also something about the length of hair that's absolute. There is long hair for women and short hair for men. What is not absolute is how long and how short. I remember my Lowell once had someone come to his office, and this is not length of hair, but it reminds me of this. Remember, mini skirts were coming out, and oh boy, they got shorter and shorter, and one guy came into his office with his wife and said, Lowell, here's a pen. I want you to mark on my wife's leg where her dress should come to. and he goes, no, I'm not going to do that. Well, of course there's some custom there, and that has to do with what is moral in a society, and there are some questions there to answer. But that's when we're dealing with length of hair, where is hang down covering? Where is that line? Take a pen and draw it. We can't do that. And there is some cultural differences, aren't there? I mean, there's going to be some places that, you're going to have what are you looking for? You're looking for the distinction of authority with long hair and short hair. Do you see that with the male and the female? But on the other hand, the word means hang down covering, so that should have some effect on when you're determining the length of your hair. What is hang down covering? So probably won't get your specific. Steve.
No, I just want to point out something here. something like that. But it's very distinctly pointed out here. Her hair is given to her for a covering.
Right. Right.
Still a dispute that probably doesn't have for everybody. For me, it just says what's the covering.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and to that, let me just make one point on that covering in verse 15. Because if you look at that word for covering there, it's not hang down covering. It is throw around. It means to throw around. So it's actually a piece of material to put around your head. So it is a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for what you might throw around your head. That's what you have instead of that. Now, they would have understood that, especially if there was a lot of new Christian women came in with shorn heads. Well, they're gonna throw that around until it grows out, and then, okay, I'm done with this. My hair is given to me for a covering. So, yeah, that's a good point. Verse 16, but if anyone seems to be contentious, we have no custom, nor do the churches of God. So we have no custom or no practice, and as far as I can tell, that's talking about this length of hair. They had a problem because verse 7, or chapter 7, verse 1, they sent a letter with questions. He's in the process of answering them. They had a question about the length of hair, and there were two practices among women, and one of them was short hair, and he's saying, if anyone seems to be contentious about this, short hair is fine. We don't practice that in the churches. So it's not done here, is what he says. Let's see. Let's move on. Oh, look at that. We are 3 minutes away, and I'm going to be jumping into the Lord's Supper here. So I think I'll cut it off a couple minutes early, and we'll pick up with the Lord's Supper. We have a couple minutes. If you've got any hair questions, I can direct you to Steve.
As far as like, hang down, what about like in African cultures, black women, their hair doesn't hang down.
Yeah. Sometimes they have hair that just doesn't hang down. Yeah. That's. Right. So how does hang down? So do you grow it out to the point where it does hang down, or I don't know. One thing I would say, and I know is from this text, is I need to be an African, see that's a woman and that's a man by their hair. I need to see that. That's what the point he's making about authority and that distinction that's between a man and a woman. But I imagine they've looked up all the verses in Africa and figured an answer to your question. But Steve?
Well, one thing would be really a difference, you go from one extreme to the other, but if it's short, that's pretty obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Even in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
But, the hair length, and whether it's curly or not, may make a difference that way.
Right.
Of course, you can look at some of them and say, well, she has short hair.
Yeah.
Just because it doesn't hang down, most can be really long.
Yeah. No, that's true, and the words short and long are used too. So that's yeah.
Like putting a mark on your leg, where's you going to be?
Yeah. We're right. Okay. Well, if I find any more depth of answer, Archie, I'll let you know at the beginning of next week.